Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Show Up with Camron Gran. I'm your host, Camron Gran, and guess what? We are officially in Season 3 of the show. As a reminder, I am not a therapist. I'm just somebody going on his own mental health journey, trying to give you guys little tips and tricks that you guys can take or leave. It's up to you because only you know what's beneficial to your health. This episode is kind of going to be like a re-lock-in for me because, to be honest, I've been struggling a little bit. The break might have normally been for that reason, but also I've been trying to find a window to start Season 3 anyways, and I hope you guys enjoy it, because what I want to do is kind of re-lock into DPT, and as well as do what I had said I wanted to do in Season 2, which is kind of do like an episode of like diving into my own things that might help me, a couple of episodes trying to teach you guys things that are beneficial, as well as exploring different outlets that I think are reliable to just dive in and try out different skills to see what works. The reason why I'm saying I want to make sure that we can dive into things that are more reliable is because if anybody's on TikTok, anybody on social media, shorts, anything, it feels like there's like tons of information out there trying to give you like, oh, this worked for me, or like you watch things and then you start like diagnosing yourself when you shouldn't. It really should come from a licensed professional. And what I like to do, which is why I love the show Hoarders, is it helps me just listen to like the way that therapists help individuals struggling and trying to figure out if any of those lessons being taught might be beneficial for me to use. But you should never take that kind of mentality and think of it as like, oh, I'm also struggling with this because I resonate with this thing. That's why it's important to just check in with also a licensed therapist, which is what I'm working up towards, because I fell out of like having insurance for a while, and now I'm trying to get back into having insurance, and because of that my therapist has kind of like been lost in the air. And not because I wanted to do that, it's just kind of happened, and I was really struggling again. And something that I kept reminding myself is, hey, Cameron, you know that DBT works for you, but you know that the only way that DBT works is if you keep practicing it. And thinking about practicing it is not practicing the thing. The reason why I'm putting that distinction in is because I am somebody who gets lost in the anxiety wheel. Like, I will eventually start spinning, and I will think that what I think is fact when it is not. But I will then think of 1,000 reasons why I'm thinking must be the case. And instead of like calming down and being like checking in on myself like I've been trained to, I just let that wheel spiral, and then I wait for days where I can get a hold of somebody that I actually care about and I know that cares about me. But like, that's not always happening. And there's a lot of days between, and then that just leads to a very dark mental state that I have been in, and I'm not going to like sugarcoat that, but I also want to not make that what this channel is about. I wanted to do this because at a certain time in my life, 3 times, I was in a very dark place, and I thought I had people I could turn to, and then they weren't there. And it's not bad, because something that I heard that Halsey said is like, your 20s are when you learn that you are not the star of everyone's story, you're just the star of your own story. And I don't think that's 100% what was happening with me, but that did resonate with me, because I started to realize like, oh, hey, if people thought about me as much as I think about them, then they would actually reach out to me, but they don't. And what's crazy to me about what I just said is I said that like, her way of thinking is like we're all self-obsessed, is kind of, and then we learn that other people don't think about us. And my thing is I think about other people so much and then notice that they don't think about me at all. And it's kind of like they're similar lessons, but they're not really the same thing. And to find those nuances of what that actually is trying to teach you is when you should dive in with a therapist and just be like, hey, I've landed on something that feels like it might be a part of my core belief system, and I don't know the right questions to ask to solve this. And it's not something that I want to continue to be a negative in my life. It's something that I want to change and either figure out how to prioritize, or compartmentalization is a useful tool that helps you keep going. And I've realized that I've let myself just always bear my heart on my sleeve, especially the only time I've ever been able to like shut down emotion is when safety gets threatened. And then when safety is threatened is kind of when all like, you know, when people are like, oh, you should be kind, you should be nice, you should like approach this in a very like collaborative or very like I'm thinking of others as I'm doing this way. I will usually always start in that place unless safety is triggered, and then that's when like I just go 1,000% at you, and then I'm like, until I feel safe again, I'm going to be this like beast throwing all these things at you until I'm like navigating back to where safety is involved. And I think that's just something left over from my childhood because I never felt safe. And so whenever I did feel safe, I just had to like corner myself in or other people because sometimes this has been triggered because I was on set. And like on set, I always have a mentality of like, oh, especially because I've done like projects where I'm directing or I'm like producing. And so I have a lot of people involved. And I am not on a big production where I have somebody always looking out for safety. So I always am like, okay, how can I do this thing, especially in horror? Because like I was filming in like an abandoned like house. And I was like, how can we film when I want to film but make sure everything is safe for the actors? And so I was like, okay, let's figure out how to make it look like we're shooting in a place that's actually more abandoned or more desolate than it is without like allowing like glass everywhere or anything, because you want the look of something, but you want to make sure you're not actually putting anybody in danger. And I've always had that distinction in my brain. Some people don't, and that's, you know, your own risk, I guess, because it's your own life. But I just get very, like, not able to function if I think anybody is going to be endangering themselves, which I think is a very positive thing. And I've noticed that I get there faster and more easy when it's other people, and then I've started to realize, hey, you're kind of sacrificing yourself so much that you're putting yourself in danger. And knowing that fact and like reiterating that to myself has allowed me to push and question and stop and falter more. Like, oh, hey, we know that we are more social than we thought, but is there a way of being social without kind of like locking ourselves down and being abandoned or feeling like we're... Because, like, how do I say this? Confrontation is one of the things that makes me feel unsafe. And I have noticed that if somebody needs to be uncomfortable in a situation, I will be that uncomfortable person if it means other people don't walk away feeling unsafe. And I also am somebody who almost got in a car wreck because I was trying to do, like, so much for other people that I wasn't taking like the notes that you should be about where are you in this current moment. Because in this example, I was shooting all night and I thought that I was fine because I felt wide awake, and tiredness is not something that you feel. It can just literally come out of nowhere where your brain just goes to sleep. I'm just putting this out there for anybody out there who's like, oh, well, I will pull over when I feel like I'm about to fall asleep, or like when I feel like I'm going to be tired. Because when this happened to me, I did not feel tired. I felt wide awake. All I knew that I was looking down a road, and then next second I was like hitting the side of a bridge. I mean, luckily the car was fine and we were fine. It was just a very eye-awakening moment for me that I'm like, hey, your brain is not going to tell you the truth about where your body is at in this current moment. It is always going to tell you what it thinks you want to hear because it wants to be safe, just like the rest of your body wants to be safe. But you're in an unfortunate situation where you prioritize what your thoughts are saying over what your body is saying. And I'm trying to change that because something I've also learned is not everybody hears thoughts. Some people are very like, I have this emotion going on. I'm not that kind of person. I'm definitely somebody who is always thinking, although I will say I also have visual aids that come along with my thoughts, which is why it's problematic when I have negative thoughts, because it's like a flashback happening in this moment. Because like I never have like, oh, bad things people said to me come back to me as though I'm reminding myself. It's always I'm hearing that person say it again, and I have to remind myself, this person doesn't even remember who you are. It's been years and years. They probably don't even remember or don't even care enough to put that as like a core thought memory for them. And that's another thing that I think is very important to remember is things that are important or vital to you don't always have the same weight as other people in like those same, like I've talked to somebody who had the same memory as me, and then we both remember different parts of a conversation or different parts of an activity or night because different things meant more to us in those moments. And I don't know, it's just been a very fascinating look at just the brain in and of itself, because that's actually why I wanted to become an actor, is because I love diving into the psychology of things, and I also love being in a place where I'm taking on somebody else's decisions, where you're more exploring, like, if I actually made this choice, these would be the consequences. And like you kind of do that reasoning when you think anything in this world, because that's what anxiety is based on, is like, oh, if I make this decision, then this will happen, then this will happen. And those are all what if scenarios, and that's very much when I start spiraling in my anxiety. And I've noticed that it can be very, very therapeutic for me if I just write a script and then I allow myself to explore these like what if possibilities, so then I actually like put myself through that like emotional state without having to actually like deal with that in the real world, where it could have more long lasting like consequences. And I don't know, that's why I love art so much, is it can become an outlet for these things that feel like they're too much to actually express, because that's when I get scared for myself, is when the thoughts stop happening but the depression and anxiety is growing. Because DBT is all about like catching a thought and retwisting it, or retraining your brain from things that you used to think were true. Because so you're like finding a new way to navigate life. Basically, is DBT is trying to help you make a new tunnel to travel rather than following the same like train lines that you've always followed. And that's kind of the thing that I've noticed with myself is, oh, if there's no thought, then I think there's no train. But there is a train. It's just an emotional train, and emotions don't always accompany sound. And that is a scary thing for me, because then I'm lost in feeling like, oh, okay, how can I solve this thing that makes me feel terrified, makes me not want to move, and makes me not want to do anything, when I don't know how to like jump in and stop it. Or like, because I've talked about the wave before, where like we get to a point where we reach this peak, and then we have to wait for the peak to subside to come back down. And part of DBT is the fact that like, well, you can't always help it when you get over that peak, but you can recognize the signs and like, you know, give yourself a little like buffer, like either coming down, a way to make yourself feel better, or a way that makes like the way up more of an incline, so it's harder to reach the peak. They're both beneficial like ways of thinking, but if you don't have like a recognized path that's taking you there, that's when things can go really awry. And that's something that I've noticed is, oh, I can recognize that this is a bad course of action, but I've never reached this course of action in this route, so I didn't know that you could get the same result for something. For instance, I do think that communication is an important thing for just the human race. But there are times where, because of the way my brain works, like if I haven't like traveled down like a route in a conversation before, I don't think that somebody else can have a bad reaction to what I'm saying, because I've never said that in a way or heard this in a way that I would have led myself to believe that this would be a negative. And so sometimes I will apologize to people and then think about it and be like, oh yes, I should apologize to them, because even hearing them back and hearing what they're saying, I can hear their side and know that even though I never would have said what like the thing that they're saying I said, I can hear how it sounds exactly like something else they told me about. And that is just a very fascinating thing about myself, is just that, oh, if I've never like been down this road and it has the same like result as something else, I'll think it's something completely new. For instance, finances. I've talked about here on before. I am probably going to talk about them again. I'm definitely doing better now, but I'm also keeping myself basically on the same route, and I'm trying to get myself off of Route 66 and like back down to like Route 60, or like you know, just trying to get yourself off the crazy route and back onto like, oh, this is more control. We have more pit stops. We have more like rest areas. We know how to like stop at a bank at this junction and like save for these goals that you have in mind. Well, it's hard to stop at a bank when it feels like you have to go 600 miles between one like gas station and another. Like, these are a lot of metaphors I'm hitting you with, but that's kind of what happens with my finances is I'm like, oh, well, this is like, if I think about this right now, it seems like, oh, this is going to be a positive. But most financial things need time for you to work through them. And I have distress tolerance issues. So I'm like, oh, but if I do this now, this is like a quick fix that will make me feel better now, and then might somehow pay off in the future. But somehow might is not something that you should do with any kind of budgeting. And it definitely isn't something that you should do with, in my circumstances, I am also trying to lose weight. That's a more active thing I'm doing now. I have done like calorie counting, but not in like a negative way, but like, oh, this is my minimum, my maximum, and then like, oh, we just need to stop. Like, and I've been trying just to follow that, so that way it's kind of like a range, but I'm trying to stick to something, and I'm like being more aware of it, and just trying not to hide, because hiding, I think, is also like can be construed as it's just not good for you. I mean, if you're playing hide and seek, then it's great because that's how you win. But if you're trying to hide from yourself or hiding from like these big things that could like be end of day kind of things, because I have always had the fear of becoming homeless, and then I realized the reason why I have that fear because I wasn't trained to budget, and I also wasn't trained to have discipline. And so normally if I'm about to become homeless, because it's happened a couple of times, it's because I've just been avoiding something. And something that I realized is the culprit has always been my lack of financial awareness. And that is something, if it goes bad, will lead me to be homeless. And if that's something that is a stopper for me, I have to figure out how to fix it. And the only way I can fix that thing is by looking at it head on and be like, hey, look, we're scared of this thing. It makes me want to like disappear forever. I never want to think about it. But if I don't think about it, it is the thing that will bite me in the batuki and send me down the road into like maybe a never-ending story of depression and hopefully, knock on wood, death. I don't, Again, don't want to think about it, but I'm acknowledging it because you can't change something if you don't acknowledge it or aren't aware that it's something that is inside of you. And that is the truth about me. I'm not trying to hide my truths anymore. I'm trying to keep them up because the first step before you can do anything is you have to find a way in your life not to be judgmental. No matter what you think, no matter what you say, and no matter what anybody else tells you, never be judgmental towards yourself. And I say that because if we start diving into those emotions of just judging ourselves because other people tell us we are supposed to, then that just leaves us into like a dark void. And the dark void starts to feel like you're a dark water that you're drowning in, and you can never like paddle above ground or above water. It's just like to me, that's what judgment is. And that's why when I was introduced into the shame versus guilt thing, that helped me so much, because that was when I realized, oh, well, judgment isn't what you think it is. Judgment is kind of more along the lines of decision making. Because there is shame, which are things that are justified that you should think about. Shame is a thing that isn't justified. Guilt is a thing that is justified, because shame are things that like society tells you, other people who aren't you tell you that you should be ashamed of. But that's not the truth, because you have your own morals, you have your own priorities, you have your own way of going about life. And just because they're different than somebody else's doesn't mean that they're the wrong path. And the guilt side of it is like you have your core values, you know what you want, what your spiritual medium is, like how you like navigate life in general. That's where the guilt comes in, because that's what is led by your own core values. And normally when you do something, it's the thing that's like bing, 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 bing. Hey, Cameron, you did something, and people are upset, and you don't know these people, or you do know them, and they're always telling you you're doing something that's upsetting them. But you have these core values, and you took in the time to listen to them, because that's always important to me. Like, no matter how I feel about something, I'm like, hey, let me hear you out. And that's a strange notion to people. I don't know how. But I'm like, just tell me why you're upset. I'll listen. I may not have nice, like, facial things because that's something I'm working on. But I will listen, and I'll wait till after I've heard you out to, like, throw out any kind of judgment. And that's just not how other people work. It's fine. It's not my... I that's something I've learned recently, is not everybody approaches life that way. But when guilt's happening, that's when it's like, oh, this is a core value thing that you're realizing, oh, what they're getting is against what I believe. And so I need to, like, tell them I'm so sorry, or, like, figure out how we can fix whatever went wrong, or, like, it's very, again, communication based. Like, you have to figure out how to be you in the best sense. Something that I sometimes fear is that maybe I speak more than other people, and maybe that's why they have a problem. And I don't want to tell people that they should speak more if they are, because, again, I'm a guy, but not a lot of guys talk a lot. And I've known that about, like, just my gender, is just like speaking is not normal, or is perceived as not being normal if you're a guy. Usually it's like, oh, we deal with emotions in subtext. We deal with emotions without vocalizing them. And in my family, especially with how my dad dealt with his emotions, that's another reason why I can't do that, is because, like, you bottle it up and you say you're fine until you start blowing up or throwing things, and that makes people feel unsafe and like they can't speak to you. And I just never wanted to do that to somebody else. So I've always been like, hey, I've had friends who, like, have, like, pieced out, and but we used to spend every day with each other. And I'm like, hey, is something go wrong? Because I didn't mean to upset you, but it seems like you're kind of putting distance between us, and I'm not aware of anything happening. And then again, ghosting in the whatever century that's supposed to be, like 2024, is, like, at an all-time peak. And I understand if you just met somebody, like, there should be a window for when ghosting is appropriate. And then after that, to me, it feels more disrespectful for yourself and another person if you don't tell them, like, A, I don't want to be your friend anymore, or in a relationship, I don't want to be with you anymore, or family dynamic, hey, we're not good family members to each other. Maybe we should just, like, not speak to each other or not have communication anymore. But, like, having that conversation, especially with people that you've known for years, I think should be a standard. But it seems more and more that nobody, like, I guess to make themselves, like, feel like they're the good guys in a conversation, will just peace out. And I've never been that way. And it's because as a child, I was taught the golden rule, which is treat others how you want to be treated. And so if I ghost you, I feel like I'm leaving you in a place where you might always wonder why we're not speaking anymore. And to me, those what-if scenarios are the worst part of my mental health. And so I never want to give that to somebody else, because I know how hard that can be to, like, always wonder. And if you work 1,000 times a minute in your brain like I do, you're like, oh, what did I do? Like, what could I have done? What things could I plan to do next time we talk to each other to make this better? And then when you speak to this person, and then they haven't thought about you in months, but you've been thinking about them for hours on end every single day. And that's something that I noticed about myself, is, like, I get into these what if scenarios, and then I realize, oh, this person doesn't think about you that much. Because if they did, they wouldn't, like, do this. They would not go for so long without talking to you. They would not do these things, especially when you told them that it hurts you. And that's kind of the thing that I've noticed, is when you know these things, the pattern can be to disappear. But because of the golden rule thing, I'm like, if I decide not to be friends with somebody, I want to tell them, because to me, telling them is showing them how much I valued the friendship. And if you don't tell somebody that, it is, like, a disservice to me, because to not tell somebody that you value their time when time is so limited just feels like a very, like, harsh thing to do to somebody. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have ghosted people, but they're people that I don't know on a personal level, or that we're just getting to know each other. Because I do think that ghosting can have a place in like dating, but it should be after a certain time period. You don't do that. And I had somebody that asked me out, and then I told them how I felt, and then they didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks and months, and then we went out to dinner and we just had a good time. And I thought that was so beautiful because it was like, hey, you were interested, I didn't feel the same way, but I still liked you and I still wanted to be your friend and I still wanted to hang out. And it just took them time to acknowledge that, but I didn't that's why I don't like ghosting, is it feels like you're not valuing somebody else's time. And that's just something that I have always struggled with, is it feels like not many people value the time that they spend with you, especially with the way my parents spent it is I was always waiting for them to choose to want to spend time with me. And then every time they wouldn't talk to me or wouldn't like return a message or send letters or any kind of thing, I would like wonder what's happening. If something must really be wrong if my mom doesn't want to speak to me. And that was a hard thing for me to realize, because comparison is something I'm also working on, because so much of life you're comparing yourself to other people. And something that I would always do is I would wonder what I did to my mom that she never wanted to hear from me. Like, I went to college and then she just disappeared, and then every time I would talk to her, she would say like, oh yeah, we didn't like do anything, so I didn't want to call, and talked about nothing. And as an actor, as somebody interested in psychology, I think people think that life is boring, and I don't think that way. I was like, oh, if all you're doing is like staying in, watching television, like just tell me what shows you're watching, like give me what those shows are about. Maybe you'll like unlock this whole like world to me in television and stories that I wasn't aware of. And that's discovery. That's like a thing that can bond you to somebody else. But like, it was just amazing that every time I would try to call home, everyone was like, oh, our lives are boring. I don't like that word, because every life has meaning and everyone has their own experiences, and to figure out like how somebody else views something is the most fascinating thing to me. So I don't understand how people can be like, oh, my life's boring, I don't want to tell you. If you don't want to tell me, that I'm fine with, but it's like, my life isn't worthy of speaking about is kind of the message that I don't like, because everyone's life is worthy speaking about regardless of how other people might approach it, because we're all on the even playing field. There is no you're higher than I am. There is no like scale system. We're all equal, and we have to remind ourselves of that, because sometimes with a comparison monster on social media and just in life in general, we think that we should be in further along our life journey than we are, or we think that we should have things that we don't. And then I think some part of life is just accepting the things that people have that we don't have or don't ever want to have, and that is okay. We don't have to want the same things. All I've ever wanted from like friends is just to like choose to have like fun together and value the time that we're like, sacrificing from our own things to be in a room together, to play video games or to play board games or just speak to each other. Like so many times in my life, people are like, Cameron, I like talking to you, but every time we talk to each other, we speak for hours and we don't ever do anything. And I'm just like, hey, I know that you would want to jump in and just play something and just be mindless and just play. And if you tell me that right up front, maybe I could be able to do that. It's just something I struggle with, because so much life happens between phone calls. But everyone likes to put you in a box, like on a shelf. Like, oh, well, I haven't spoken to Cameron since last time I pulled him off the shelf 6 months ago. But he's the same guy. Nothing has changed. He's perfect in this little like shelf that I left him in. And that's not how life works. Like, life happens. Time happens. And so if people change. And people change their mind often, and can't always be truthful about it. And I used to like have an issue with that, and then I realized, hey, they're going through something. They thought they could be this thing for me, and they couldn't. And that it's scary to tell somebody that it's not, like, they changed their mind, I guess. because I've realized this about myself, is that people think I'm very judgmental. And I'm trying to figure out how to present the opposite, because I can't tell how many times people think I'm going to judge them. And it's just like, oh, well, that's fascinating that you would choose to do those things. I wouldn't for such and such reasons, but I'm not going to judge you for those things. Like, we all only have one life to live. I'm just fascinated by how you choose to live yours. And that's fine that we choose to live them in different styles. It's just one of those things that, like, as you grow up, it's like people think that disagreeing is a problem, where I think that the more you disagree, the more, like, fascinating life gets. Because the thing that I love about sports, even though I rarely played sports, is sportsmanship is all about finding an equal ground. Because I mean, there is you're challenging teams. You come together. You try really hard to beat the other one, and then the reason why you have that lineup at the end, especially in baseball. I don't know about other sports, but in baseball you definitely have the lineup where you, like, shake everybody's hand and you're like, good game, and that's because you have differences. You don't always agree on everything. You have different people that are, like, you value over what's happening on this game or whatever, but you always make sure that you come together and then say thank you for playing this game, or just, like, giving it your all, because then we have this like challenge to just, like, thrive in together. And that's something I've always admired about sports, is it's kind of like, oh, a ton of us on the field don't actually like each other, but we love this sport, so we're going to give it our all, and then, like, let each other live our own lives without trying to influence other people. And that's, I think, fine. And that's what I started to realize with myself, is that when I'm at my dark place, I feel so alone. And then a lot of times these, like, nuances and, like, the beauty of life gets lost on me, because I am by myself and I don't have a bouncing board to, like, catch, like, these negative thoughts happening. And that's usually when I do catch them, is when I am talking to somebody and we're just like, oh, I didn't even realize that this was a negative thought I was telling myself until I was trying to explain it to you. And that was a huge epiphany for me. So thank you for giving that to me. I mean, you didn't know, or you weren't trying to do that, but that was a huge revelation that really, really unlocked something in myself. And that's just something that I'm trying to help other people do, because that's why I started this channel. And it's been, again, we're on season 3, and I'm really grateful for that. And it hasn't, like, been, like, the most amazing road possible, but I am trying to push myself to do better and better every time I get on, and showcase just, like, how the power of speaking and acknowledging what you're going through and figuring out, like, the routes that your brain takes. Because if you know the route it normally takes, you can figure out, like, a redirect, because that's what you do in a train, because you can't turn it around completely. You can just redirect it, and it'll just take a bigger loop to it in a different direction. And that's why I use that kind of metaphor, is it's just, you don't have complete control, but you do have some, because, again, there is a rational part of our brain, and I don't want to say irrational, but it is like we don't have as much control over that side of our brain. And all we can do is, like, figure out coping mechanisms when we're on the other side of it, because when you can take a good thing, a good skill of DBT, and then you can use that good skill to torture yourself, because you're already past the threshold of when that skill would have helped you, and you don't know it. And then sometimes I have acknowledged, I'm like, oh, this skill is beneficial, but I'm past the point of that being helpful to me. For instance, I love movies. I love going to them. They've always been an escape for me. And something that I realized is I use movies to help me cope with life and help me think about things in different ways. But I also have used movies to not live. And the thing that I have realized with myself is, like, oh, if we're past the point of this being helpful, we need to, like, stop for a second and be like, okay, we're going to these things, and this is not why we go to movies. We want to experience other ways of living. We want to have, like, an exciting experience, but instead we're, like, diving deeper into depression. And that's not what I chose to have this goal for. So if that's the result happening, then maybe I need a break from movies just so I can redirect and figure out what I'm doing to have that thing be the result. Because I never want to lose that love for film. It's what makes me going. It's what keeps me going, sorry. And it's just something that I know about myself. And that's something that I would say to all of you guys is just like, summer just happened. What were the things that you did to unwind, or what things do you normally wait for summer for? Or like, what things do you put on a pedestal and then like, this is for the good times. Once I reach the good times, that's when I'll give myself this thing. And the reason why I say ask that question is because something that I love that has been reflected more and more to me recently is like, anxiety is about planning for the future. Inside Out too. But it's also about setting goals, which are good things for you in your life. All you can do, though, is you can also set yourself up for failure, because if you're always waiting for this thing to be accomplished to reward yourself, then you never know what a reward feels like. So when you reward yourself, it doesn't feel like a reward because you've taken away the experience of a reward. Which is the same thing with what I was doing with movies, is because when I go to movies, I go there to cope, I go there to explore, I go there to open a side of my brain that I don't always get to explore. But I turned this into a negative thing because I was always like trapped in my depression. And that is what you have to challenge yourself constantly, is like, hey, I love, like, if you're a drawer, a good example is I love drawing, but I'm not allowing myself to draw anymore because whenever I pick up a pen to draw, all these emotions that I've been like hiding from come to the surface, and so my drawings are just always a reflection of these dark feelings I'm having. But the reason why I love drawing is because it makes me feel joy, and the thought of just having another drawing that's full of the sadness that I have is just too much for me. And so you get what I mean? It's like the reason you're in the room, reason why you brought yourself, like, goes away. And that's, I think, when it becomes hard to like do the things we love. And that's why I'm just trying to push myself to be better than I was before, and just to dive into this next stage of Show Up with Camron Gran, and just forget about the past, because thinking about wasted time is just wasting more time. Again, Argyle, thank you so much. I think it's a great quote. It's something that's been helping me a lot, because comparison. Other people are way further along in their lives than I am, and that is okay. I'm happy for those people. And people that I know that I'm close to are further along, and I always stop myself because I'm like, hey, you don't get to like be mad at other people for their successes because you don't know what they were going through at that time. And I think that's a good thing to remind yourself, is like, it can be so easy to like get wrapped up in being happy about other people failing, that like we forget that, like, when you're a friend of somebody or when you care about somebody, you should push them up, and hopefully some of that energy will get returned to you at some point. And if it doesn't, that's okay, because that's not the reason why you are a good person or a good friend. You doing that thing for them is why you're a good friend. And taking that away because you're not seeing that in return is not like something that you should be trying to do. This episode is, I'm going to be wrapping up, but that's kind of like what my goal for the next season of the show is, just, let's focus on how can I highlight skills that are beneficial for other people? How can I like explore my own mentality? How can I just have a moment of relief? And how can I just think and contemplate and challenge myself every day? And that's why I'm planning to continue to watch Mom, because that show pushes me to just reflect on what happened with my own family, and just like turn something that was a negative into a positive that I can laugh at. And that may not be how other people cope, because we all deal with like trauma differently, and that's okay. Like, how you deal with your trauma is 100% okay. As long as it's not hurting other people, it's what I mean, or yourself. Like, how you deal with your trauma should be at least have that bar. Is like, don't hurt other people, don't hurt yourself, but how you deal with it and what you like choose to do from there is beneficial. It's just something that I learned in life, is that it's very easy to, I guess, nitpick and belittle yourself and your accomplishment, especially when you're the only person deciding the bar of when a reward should happen or when to feel like success is here. Big successes are amazing, but like if you're in social media, it feels like, oh, you're not successful unless you've accomplished this step. And I'm just not somebody who's going to buy into that, because I think that's ridiculous. Because I do this because I'm trying to help people, and I don't do this for my own. I do love telling stories, but I tell stories because, to me, a story is just like an idea being explored, trying to like showcase another way of thinking or another way of being. Because like so many films I've watched where like things are happening, I would never do them. I would never want to do them. But like it's like, oh, okay, well that's fascinating, because I haven't gone as far as you have, but I've done some of the things that are like happening in this film, and then been like, oh well, I'm glad I didn't make those choices, but seeing them on screen really like showcased like the importance of that thought, or like the value of having this thought, or dealing with this trauma, or dealing with this emotion. And that's also why I love comedy, because comedy is just about pushing truths and finding humor in them. And if you can laugh about your trauma, I say round of applause for you. Because wouldn't you rather spending your time laughing? I mean, hopefully laughing in in a relieving way, and not in a way that escalates. Because I laugh at sadness, and not like I'm better than you sadness. I mean, if you've watched Grey's Anatomy, there's a whole scene where Izzy Stevens, in season 5, you can tell how long I've been watching that show, where she's laughing because George passed away, and somebody who barely knew him was like crying at his funeral. And people were like upset that was happening, and I'm like, girl, you deal with that trauma how you're dealing with it, because it is kind of ironic that you guys have known somebody for so long, and none of you guys are crying that hard, but she's outright bawling. Because I had that experience at my dad's funeral where like people were bawling and like crying their eyes out, and then I'm like, my dad did not like you. I'm not gonna tell you who it is because that's just rude, but like it's something that was happening in my brain sometimes, where you're like, okay, well they're here to grieve, I guess, and funerals are mostly for the people there, not really for the person that's gone, I've noticed, and that's okay. But because it can be very cathartic to be with people who are grieving over the same person. But that was just something I was like, I don't know how my dad would feel like you're here. And that's just something I was noticing, and like but I was more upset on my dad's behalf rather than them crying, and that's why I felt okay with like, a little sardonic or sarcastic laugh, and just being like, okay, well I guess they'll be over there doing whatever they're going to do in their drama. I'm not going to contribute to it because I already have my own stuff. And that's just too much for me. But it's kind of like the thing where you're like, oh, well that happened. We're not gonna like dive as far as that person is, because at a certain point I was like, am I being a bad son because I'm not upset as this person is? Because then again, that's the comparison thing coming into the brain, where you're like, oh, well, if you've watched television, people like funeral scenes happen all the time, and I'm like, oh, well, I need to be like. I need to be like at 100. I'm like at a 5. I should be way more aggrieved than I'm currently being. And then it's just one of those things that's fascinating to me about life, is just like, oh well, you do you. I thought that I had that like feeling or emotion, but I'm not on your level, and that is okay, because we're different people, and different people react to different things in different ways, and that's 100% fine. And that's kind of the thing I'm trying to highlight in just this show, is that however you deal with what you're going through, that's fine. All I'm talking about, and the reason why I'm sharing this story with you, is just like this is the way that I cope. And if anything I've said, it can help you like navigate or find something in yourself that will help you cope. That's all I'm hoping for. And if it's really bad, my hope is for you that this episode will highlight the fact that, okay, there's a way of coping about it. I don't have the skills like that I need to have to cope with it, and I can recognize that in myself. And it is okay to look for help. There's no shame and asking for help. We all have our limits. We all have like a certain point where we can't like go any further, and that is fine. It's like when you can, again, me saying that is fine is me saying no judgment, because there is no judgment in yourself, because you can't change who you are. You can only figure out better ways to explore what's happening in your own self. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys for this episode. Thank you for staying with me for 2 seasons. Hopefully we'll continue further on. I really enjoyed this episode. And I can't wait to get back with more lessons, more mom, more maybe Am I the Jerks? And hopefully definitely more like educational things just about like mental health in general. But as you go about your week, we're going to end this how we always do, by reminding you guys that just take a moment for yourself. Just really hone in. Show up for yourself, because I'm telling you guys, you matter.